Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here with my Week 1 LCK review, my power rankings, my analysis. I'm going to be going over every single series that happened in Week 1 in the LCK. You guys seem to like the LPL video that dropped yesterday, and so I am excited to bring this one for the LCK here today. Just a little bit of housekeeping to do before the video starts. If you're interested in the schedule that I will be releasing all of these videos on, I did make a community tab post. I'm not sure how many of those actually get put out to subscribers and people who watch the videos, so if you are interested in that, go check out the community tab on my page. I have a schedule listed if you're curious, but let's go ahead and jump into LCK action. If you didn't watch the LPL video and you are wondering what the process for this video is going to look like, I will be going over every single series that happened during Week 1. I will be giving my player of the series as well as my dud of the series, as well as just going over things that impressed me or did not impress me in the series, kind of outlooks for the team. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the first series of the year in the LCK, and that was DRX taking on Liiv SANDBOX in a 2-0 win for SANDBOX that was almost entirely attributed to the top side of the map. Game 1 was DRX's to lose, and lose it they did. Very much thanks to this top side that had pretty much no answer to the Tryndamere Xin. The Graves did a lot of damage, but he didn't do a lot of anything but dying in that game. A big reason why they couldn't hang on to this gold lead that they had pretty much the entire game was because of topside here. Both top and jungle did not have a very good series here for DRX. I will say, in terms of positive points for DRX, bot lane did pretty well in Game 1. Not as much in Game 2, but Deft and Barrel really looked solid in Game 1. They got a lot of the gold lead that DRX had was due to that bottom lane and due to Deft's Aphelios. The Sona obviously is just a strong pick right now. We're not seeing it a ton in other regions, but if you can get into something like the Yuumi and not the Leona, it's going to be something that does really, really well. But either way, Deft and Barrel getting a decent lead here in Game 1. Just kind of throws it away with topside playing really poorly. And then Game 2 is a very similar story, except you don't really have that lead. It was pretty much Liiv SANDBOX from the get-go. And a lot of that was due to my player of the series, and that's going to be Krocko. Originally, I gave the player of the series here to Dove in the top lane on the Tryndamere. You absolutely could do that if you really wanted to. I think Krocko had a little bit more of a impact on the entire game. Closer did really well in Game 1 as well, I should note, on the Syndra. He had a really good Game 1 on Syndra. And he was fine in Game 2 on the Akali, but it wasn't the same. Game 2 was really the Dove and Krocko show, absolutely obliterating Kingen. Theoretically, you could give Kingen the MVP of the series, because I think he gave Liiv SANDBOX more gold than anybody actually made plays for Liiv SANDBOX, but Kingen will have to settle with my dud of the series, and this was something we were concerned about. I know I ranked DRX really, really highly in my power rankings at 4th, but the big concern of this team was Kingen. Is Kingen going to hold up in the top lane? And in this series, he did not. Now, granted, it's not like everybody else on this team played great. Pyosik is another contender for dud of the series. He did not have a very good series to kick off the year. Krocko outplayed him in almost every single aspect. Krocko kind of picking up where he left off last year. A lot of people were confused as to why I put Krocko so high in my jungler power rankings at the beginning of the year. This is why. He absolutely takes over the map in this series. Really just out-jungles a jungler who was one of the better junglers in the entire world last year in Pyosik. Zika didn't die much in lane, but he didn't do much in team fights either with the Rise. You know, that pick is really global, and he didn't do much globally with it. Closer kind of outplayed him in that respect as well. And like I said, the bot lane is definitely still a little bit of a question mark for SANDBOX. They weren't very good in Game 1 on the Jhin Yuumi. They looked much better in Game 2 on the Ezreal Leona. A little bit more of a safe bot lane that they can kind of play a little bit more aggressive on, because they can, you know, they have a lot of escape tools on their own without jungle assistance. The jungle assistance was mostly top lane because Dove was so far ahead of Kingen for a majority of the game. I think there was a point where the Tryndamere, Dove on the Tryndamere was like 7 levels up or something on Pyosik in the jungle, which is just absolutely absurd. It's an absolute shellacking here from SANDBOX, but a very, very solid win from a team that I don't think a lot of people had a ton of expectations for at the beginning of the year in SANDBOX, and definitely a really questioning loss here for DRX. You would hope that your jungle mid duo kind of comes around. And if you're DRX, really, you are really hoping that Kingin is not this giant gaping hole like he was in this series. You lose to the Tryndamere in game 1, so what do? You run it back with the same champion. You lose again. The draft was definitely questionable, but even more so, you got to worry about Kingin up in the top lane. He wasn't great last year. He definitely was not great in summer. He was kind of the weakness for this team in spring as well, so definitely a concern here for DRX. Positives, though, would be that the bot lane looked pretty good, or at least good enough. And then, you know, hopefully your mid lane can be a little bit more proactive on picks like Ryze if the map is opened up a bit more, even though game 1 was still a bit open, so... yeah, as for SANDBOX, great win. Krako and Dove looking great. Dove looking great in his first ever series in the top lane. Closer looked really good as well. That top side of the map is definitely the strength for this team. Bot lane definitely still needs to come into their own a bit, but for their first ever series in the LCK, they did fine. They lost, but not too badly, and then they were fine in team fights. So, pretty much everything you could ask for from a weak side bot lane, and then just huge props to Krako and Dove for this series overall. Moving on to the second series of the 2022 LCK Spring Split, the second series of day 1, and that was T1 taking on a lot of their former teammates here in the Kwangdong Freecs in a really confident, a really solid 2-0 series win here for T1. Not a lot to talk about here, honestly. There could be a lot more. Really the big story comes in game 2, the one that everybody's talking about, but well, game 1 was, it took a while for them to close it out, but it was never really in jeopardy. Gumayusi got really far ahead on the Ezreal here, and he was just able to output a ton of damage. That's really what it is. They have almost impeccable zone control with this team comp. Drafting the Zoe, drafting the Ezreal, even drafting something like the Karma. You can actually just fight around objectives so much easier, which is why I think they felt so confident in playing a little bit slower in game 1, taking almost 40 minutes to close the game out when really they absolutely had no reason to take that long. Although, you know, T1 is a little bit notorious for making games take a little bit longer than they need to, even if there's not a ton of action going on. T1 was basically in control the entire series. Game 2 was a little bit more interesting. It was more of a stomp, I will say, but obviously the thing everybody's talking about, Faker's pentakill stolen by his jungler owner. And the absolute rage of Faker trying to team kill Owner with ultimate after that. Fantastic play. Really the only exciting part of the series at any point because it was an absolute stomp. My player of the series is going to go to Gumayusi, although it really could go to Faker. And honestly, I wanted to give it to Owner just because of the stolen pentakill. He did play really well outside of that, but obviously the memes are all around him. But for me, Gumayusi was the best player in this series. His Ezreal in game 1 was phenomenal. He really, I mean, the absolute zone control of that, the amount of damage he was able to put out before fights even started, was absolutely nuts. In game 2, he got the Caitlyn, the super overpowered Caitlyn right now, and he did exactly what he should have into the Jhin, which was demolish. He won hard. So, overall, just a really good series from Gumayusi. Owner did have a really good series as well. The Nidalee game in game 2 was fantastic. Him and Faker paired up really well on the Nidalee Victor. I expect to see that pick more from T1 in the future because it seems to be a pick that Owner is actually terrific on. And in general, I would say Owner just had complete junk this entire series. That's why my dud of the series is going to go to Elim here, who is definitely in conversation for the dud of the week in the LCK overall. Not a good series here for Kwangdong. Definitely not a good series for Elim. He looked outclassed in both games, especially game 2 on the Nidalee. As the Lee Sin, you're, you know, relatively able to fight that Nidalee early, especially if you can get on her, and he just couldn't track her. It was a very difficult series for Elim. Not good at all. So, overall, really solid win here for T1. They're going to be looking at the series as a huge win. I'm very concerned about Kwangdong after this week, and especially after the series. I mean, again, this is basically the A team versus the B team from last year, but they are adding basically the best top laner in Korea onto this team, and it did almost nothing. Keen looked irrelevant in the series. He didn't look particularly bad. He was by far the part of the map that was losing the least. But going up against a top laner who was making his LCK debut in Zeus, you know, you would hope Keen would win harder, even though Zeus is a really good player and a really hype prospect. I'm not trying to take away from Zeus, but, you know, Keen is Keen. He's fantastic. You would have hoped Kwangdong would have done a lot better in this series, and they didn't. They got outclassed at pretty much every level, so definitely a little bit of a concern here for Kwangdong, but if you're a T1 fan, I mean, this is as good as you could possibly look to start the season off. 2 very dominant victories where you were pretty much always in control, so definitely a very good victory for T1. Everybody looking good. Moving on to day 2 here for the LCK Week 1, it was kicked off by a really interesting series to talk about here in Hanwha Life, taking on Nongshim RedForce. A 2-1 series win here for my 10th place team in the power rankings in Hanwha Life. A very, very solid win here that they picked up on the back of some young players for them, and their main veteran really stepping up and playing really, really well in this series. Let's talk about game 1, which was the Nongshim win. This one was pretty clear-cut. Kana actually just played really, really well on the Graves. If Kingen wants to study the Graves versus Tryndamere matchup, this is how you play the Graves versus Tryndamere matchup in the top lane. Kana looked really, really good and really comfortable on that pick, really snowballing the game out of control to a point where Nongshim was just winning every single team fight. You had the scaling on the side of Nongshim as well with the Azir Jinx versus the Syndra Jhin. Obviously, one side's just going to scale a little bit harder, and especially if Graves is ahead going into the Tryndamere, that game shouldn't be much of an issue, even if Effort was making some interesting engages at some points. But games 2 and 3 were the Hanwha Life show in a good way. Really 3 players that I want to point out on Hanwha Life are On Fleek, Karis, and Sam D, because they played phenomenal in this series, especially game 3. Sam D's Jhin in game 3 was absolutely nuts. It's actually something that I didn't even know he had in him. Sam D was someone who never really had these pop-off performances when he was playing in the LPL. He was a very good AD carry, but he wasn't necessarily the pop-off kind of player. He popped off in game 3 here. He was the reason that they won game 3. His Jhin looked great. I expect them to go back to the Jhin a lot, because it clearly is his best pick. He looks more comfortable on that than anything I saw him on in the LPL. But let's not take away what this jungle mid duo as well has done. On Fleek, especially in game 2, played especially well on the Xin Zhao, had complete jungle control over Dread, who everyone knows I'm a little bit down on Dread. Oh, by the way, On Fleek is starting here over Willer. That should give you some sort of inclination as to, I guess, what they think of Willer if On Fleek is coming in to start over him. Not that On Fleek's a terrible player, but, you know, it's just an interesting little development there. But On Fleek looked really good in games 2 and 3, especially game 2, kind of took over the map. Game 3, he was also very clearly in the lead. And then Karis on this Victor, that was a really, really pleasant surprise. Going up against what a lot of people consider one of the better mids in the entire world in BDD here. And he was, quite frankly, just the better player this series. Both in games 2 and 3, he was pretty obviously the better player on that Victor. My player of the series is going to go to Sam D, but it really easily could have gone to On Fleek and Karis as well. Dudu played well in the top lane as well. He just wasn't quite as standout, and he did not look as good in game 1 as some of the others. So he's not quite on that same level for me as On Fleek, Karis, and Sam D in terms of how he performed in this series, but those 3 really played phenomenally. As for Nongshim, very questionable series at best. Some of the players that you're kind of relying on to be good weren't good. Effort, namely, was not good, and then BDD really got gapped in games 2 and 3 by a lot. He's actually going to be my dud of the series here. He did not look good in the season kickoff. Karis was very clearly the better mid laner here, which is definitely concerning because when you look at the construction of this team and how they are built player-wise, this team is kind of built around BDD being the big carry for their roster if Kana is not going to be that in the top lane like he was in game 1. BDD is really going to have to step up and be that for this team, and he certainly was not in this series. He was not even the best mid laner between the two teams. He was probably the worst player on his team. I know Effort will probably give him a little bit of contention for that, but for me, BDD played a little bit worse, if not only because of the expectation around it. Dread also did not have a good series, getting beaten by On Fleek in games 2 and 3. Although he did have a bit of pressure in game 1, so I will give him credit for that. Like I said, Kana had a really good game 1, but not as strong in games 2 and 3. Dudu did a good job of bouncing back after what was kind of a shellacking in game 1 by the Graves. But overall, just not a good series here from Nongshim, a team that going into the season definitely should have been favored to win this series and win it really comfortably as well. So definitely a little bit of concern. You're very happy if you're a Hanwha Life fan, especially with how Samdi played and with how Karis played. Two of the players that you're going to be relying on to win you games this year, if you are going to win. They played really, really well in the series. But like I said, for Nongshim, I'm not saying it's panic button time yet, but it's definitely concern time, because two of your more established players here in BDD and Effort definitely are showing the worst sides of them going into this year. Moving on to the second series here of day 2, and that was KT Rolster taking on DAMWON KIA in a pretty interesting series, despite the fact that it was a clean 2-0 sweep here from DAMWON, the defending world champ. No, I was the defending world finalist, I should say. Almost got my 2021 brain out there. A good start to the year here from DAMWON, but not the worst start of the year you could possibly have here for KT, especially going up against a terrible team. Game 1 was really close up until the end. A big shout out to Showmaker's Orianna and Dektum's Caitlyn. They were a big reason why this team was actually able to pull out the victory. In the end, the gold was very even for a majority of this game, and it was really on a knife's edge who was going to win. DAMWON did have a lot of pressure throughout the series, but, you know, KT did a good job keeping themselves in the game, even if they weren't necessarily on the ball in terms of everything. Game 1, like I said, was very close, but big shout out, especially to Showmaker's Orianna there in game 1, was really the big reason why they won that game, at least in my opinion, was Orianna, and just those team fights was really, really disgusting. Canyon played really well on the Xin Zhao just in general, but, you know, some miscommunications, which we'll get to later, but Dektum, good on the Caitlyn as well. The Caitlyn, you better do well on. It's such a good pick in the meta right now. I would argue it's the best pick in the meta right now. If you get Caitlyn Lux in lane, you better win lane, and they did. So, overall, just a good win here from DAMWON in game 1. Showed resilience, while they didn't have a ton, you know, they had some teamwork issues, I will say. Not a perfect level of synergy. They still looked fine, and they show that this team definitely is replacing, you know, some talent that left them with more talent. And that showed even more in game 2, in my opinion. Canyon looked phenomenal in game 2 here on the Jarvan. Obviously, Canyon and Showmaker looked great. What else is new? But really the big story of game 2 was Dektum's Aphelios being absolutely disgusting in closing out that game there. I mean, really, just, that might be the best game of AD carry that we have seen this year so far, or at least it's up there. His Aphelios was absolutely disgustingly good. I almost gave him player of the series just for this Aphelios game, but I think overall, in the series, you know, if we're talking about both games 1 and 2, my player of the series is going to go to Canyon, who looked really good in both games 1 and 2 on the Xin Zhao and the Jarvan, out jungling Cuz on the Lee Sin. Cuz has always looked a little bit shaky on the Lee Sin, and now we get 2 games of it, which is really questionable, but Cuz is going to be my dud of the series here, definitely out jungled by Canyon. And in my opinion, definitely looking like the weakest part of that KT Rolster team, which didn't look too bad. Rest in peace, Arya, for having to debut in the LCK going up against Showmaker. Definitely not the ideal debut scenario, but he didn't look too bad. He looked competent, at least. Aiming actually looked much better in this series than I think he had in the past year on BLG. Not terrific, but his game 1 on Jhin was definitely a lot better than anything we saw out of him last year in the LPL. Life and Rascal were fine. Rascal and Hoya in the top lane, definitely an interesting matchup here because neither side really got a ton of attention. There was a really funny play where Hoya was like, I can push for this tower because Canyon's watching me. And then Canyon just left to go take the blue buff and Hoya died. And that's the kind of miscommunication that you get early in the season when you have new players. But overall, I don't think either Rascal or Hoya played exceptionally bad or exceptionally good. I think both were just generically fine. I'm a little bit sad to see Hoya getting the time early. I'm not surprised, but I would love to see what Bertle can do for this team. I know he's a lot more high variance, a lot more high resource, but, you know, he's such an interesting player, and I'd like to see him get some action if possible, but I get wanting to go with the safer top side here in Hanwha, at least to start off. So, you know, like I said, interesting series, a good kickoff here for DAMWON, because your main players are playing really well. Canyon and Showmaker obviously are great, but, you know, obviously you wanted to know how DECTUM and Kellen would play coming in here, and Series 1 is definitely a pass from them. They passed with flying colors, especially DECTUM, who looked phenomenal against KT here in Series 1. As for KT themselves, not horrible takeaways here. Arya had to go against Showmaker, so you're hoping he can be better in the series to come. And then aiming, I actually thought, had a pretty good kickoff here. Life played well in lane. A little bit more concerned about his recon engages later in the game, but Life and aiming had decent chemistry in laning phase at least. And then a little bit of concern, you know, in terms of jungle. Cuz didn't look too great, and he also didn't look too great last year, but he's never been a guy who's looked great on the Lee Sin. So definitely something I would expect to see maybe move around a bit once he's on some picks he's more comfortable with, but overall, like I said, good win for DAMWON, not a terrible loss for KT. Canyon, Showmaker, and DECTUM look fantastic, and I hope that they can keep that up throughout the entire year. Moving on to day 3, and we get the debut of one of the more hyped off-season teams that we have been talking about in the LCK, and that was Gen.G taking on DRX in a 2-0 series sweep here for Gen.G pretty confidently. A lot of the same problems that DRX had in the first series of the week are flaring back up here in the second series of the week, but Gen.G looking really good, most especially their two big arrivals this offseason. Peanut and Chovy looking really, really good together. And then Lehens. Lehens had a fantastic series. That game 2 on Leona, he was absolutely everywhere. You know, I talked a little bit of trash on Lehens at the beginning of the year, only because I feel like sometimes he gets over-aggressive in his plays, maybe a little more so than the rest of his team is willing to follow up. But with Peanut on this team, I'm actually not as concerned with that after week 1, which obviously, we can see that in the performances, but playstyle-wise, Lehens being a little bit over-roamy and over-aggressive, you have one of the more consistent AD carries who can definitely function on his own in Ruler in the bottom lane, and then also you have another really aggressive kind of supportive style player in Peanut in the jungle. This could be the perfect landing spot for Lehens to go back to being one of the more hyped support players in the entire world. He showed it in the series for sure. Game 1 was the Peanut show. He was everywhere on Viego. He absolutely took over the map, and DRX could do absolutely nothing about it. They were kind of even up until really their laning prowess kind of took over for them. King getting absolutely destroyed by Doran in the top lane. It was not even remotely close. Doran doing a really good job in this series, looking a lot better than he did last year, just in general, but I guess a lot of people do that when going up against Kingen. But yeah, Peanut looked really good in game 1, so did Chovy on the Corki, taking over some team fights there, looking really good. Just generally a good game 1 for Gen.G, and then game 2 was even more dominant. Even less close than game 1 was, and that's where Lehens and Peanut really just took over the entire map. They had pretty much every inch of the entire map warded, and were making plays from top to bot to everywhere, just kind of getting everybody ahead. Just a feel-good win here for Gen.G. Pretty much exactly how you want to kick off the season. For DRX, I mean, this is definitely not the way you wanted to start your season here, going 0-2, 0-4 in the first week. This top side is very, very questionable here. Kingen obviously is my dud of the series. He was atrocious, but Pyosik wasn't much better, and neither of them were really that good in the first series as well. They were both the two players that I was most concerned about in the first series here for DRX. Not a good start to the year for this top jungle duo, which is really unfortunate because, as everyone knows, I'm probably Pyosik's biggest fan in the world. He's probably my favorite player in the world. He did not have a good week 1 here, and neither did Kingen. And they were basically the reason that this DRX team was completely uncompetitive. Not that everybody else on this team played well. Bot lane definitely lost. Deft and Beryl not having the best series. They looked fine in the first series of the year, but they were going against arguably the worst bot lane in the LCK. And that's not what you want to see. Them going up against a much better bot lane here in Ruler and Lehens kind of being all over the map anyways. Obviously, Beryl likes to roam as well, but The 2v2 was not good, and then even the 2v1, they couldn't really get much done. I think really the only shining light for DRX here was that Zika didn't play too bad in the mid lane here against Chovy, but there also wasn't a ton of opportunity for him to do much on the LeBlanc. I think the Game 2 draft, in my opinion, is just absolutely ludicrously bad from DRX. They really accomplished nothing. Leaving the Graves open in the top lane after the Ziggs gets picked in the mid lane is just kind of bold, I'll say, at the very least. I don't know. I'm not usually one to call out draft diff, but Game 2 draft was also really, really bad for DRX, in my opinion. I think they got losing matchups in both mid and top, and then also allowed, you know, a self-sustaining bot laner where Lehens can kind of just go off and do whatever he wants into an Aphelios. So, just not the best draft, in my opinion, from DRX in Game 2. Not saying it's complete draft diff, because topside did play rather poorly, but, you know, just something to point out. Definitely concerned for DRX. Overall, there was no weak spot for this team. Everybody on the team looked and played very, very well. So, overall, just a nice win for Gen.G. As for DRX, pretty disastrous start to the season for them, especially on the top side. Hopefully, they can get things figured out there, but that was their projected weakness going into the season, and it's definitely coming to fruition. Next up is what is probably, I mean, I haven't done the math on it, but what I'm pretty sure is the longest series of the year globally by far. And that is Fredit BRION taking on T1 in a really close 2-1 series win here for T1. Every game was in T1's control, but also every game was kind of in Fredit's control. It's really interesting how this series ended up playing out. Game 1 was really fun to watch. T1 had a nice lead, and BRION did a fantastic job of coming back, mostly due to some Morgan engages. And yes, Morgan is playing here in the top lane, and yes, he's looking pretty good. Yes, he is going into a rookie, but it's a rookie that everybody had a lot of high hopes for here in Zeus. And Morgan looked really good, especially on that Camille in Game 1. Some picks that, you know, he did play last year, but definitely didn't look like this last year. A very, very close Game 1 here that BRION is barely able to take out. Game 2 was also extremely close. Gumayushi is actually just nuts on the Aphelios. He absolutely goes off here in Game 2. A big reason why they are able to win the series in general, but Game 2 here, without the Aphelios, I'm not actually sure they win these team fights. So really huge Game 2 from Gumayushi. A really good Game 2 from Keria as well. But Game 3 is really where this bot lane absolutely took over. This Aphelios Lulu, this is the lane that we've been seeing globally, the Aphelios Lulu, that has really caused problems for a lot of teams. And this is why, because, man, Aphelios goes almost untouched in a lot of these fights, gets so much damage off, absolutely deletes a lot of Fredit BRION, who are playing relatively well, especially Lava in the mid lane on the Corki, playing relatively well. Keria on the Lulu keeps that Aphelios so safe. The polymorphs are absolutely ginormous. I want to give credit to Owner as well for the knockups on Jarvan. They were absolutely crucial in ending the game here as well. Some really clutch ones to set up some plays. Faker played well. Zeus isn't really doing much. He had that giant 1v4 in the mid lane on Gwen that he just won because Gwen goes immune and then doesn't really, you know, Gwen doesn't die. That's more of a champion thing. And then he gets absolutely deleted by Lava's Corki a little bit later. So, yeah, I mean, Zeus is okay. Definitely not this outstanding first week you might have expected from him, but, you know, he was fine. Everybody else on T1, though, was looking really good, especially this bot lane. Gumayushi and Keria are working just as well as they did last year. Keria was easily the best support in the LCK last year, and he's playing like he is again going into this year. But Gumayushi looks absolutely nuts. He's going to be my player of the series here. The Aphelios games in Games 2 and 3 were the reason that they won this series. Big props to him. He went God mode in Game 3. And then you know, for Fredit BRION, this is honestly as good as you're ever going to hope for. Obviously, the Kingslayer moniker is kind of back. T1 aren't the reigning world champions, so I guess they don't have the buff to actually win the series. But they do take them to 3 games, and they look really competitive, especially in Games 1 and 2. Morgan looking really good in the top lane. He was actually the biggest surprise for me as someone who looked really good. The solo lanes in general, I thought looked pretty good. Morgan and Lava. Lava was definitely the member of this team I was most confident in going into 2022, and he proved that on the Corki, especially in Game 3. He looked good. And then on the Galio in Game 1, he looked good as more of that supportive style role. Lava's honestly just a good player, and I think he gets underrated because he's on this Fredit BRION team, but also had a decent series. I think if the bot lane played a little bit better, it would have been a lot closer. My dud of the series is going to go to Delight down at the support position. He kind of just got outplayed at every single turn by Keria, especially in games 2 and 3. It was a huge support diff in my opinion. Lulu absolutely took over game 3, and even the Nautilus in game 2 was so much more impactful than the set. So Delight is going to get my dud of the series. If you're looking for a negative part of Bro, and the reason that they probably lost the series, it was probably the bottom lane in general, which, unfortunately, we did identify at the beginning of the year as what was likely going to be the weak point of this roster. So that kind of coming to fruition, kind of being the reason that they lost the series in general. But, you know, you have to give props to T1, who look really good at the start of the year here. I know Fredit BRION isn't the best team to be, like, super ultra competitive with, but it's good to see a team like T1 get tested early in the year and still be able to come out with the win. Big props to Gumayusi, like I said, and Keria. Keria came very close to winning the player of the series for me, but Gumayusi was, you know, just too good for me not to give it to him. As for Fredit BRION, they're probably better than we gave them credit for to start the year here. Their communication, obviously them returning 4 members from last year has definitely helped their macro play, but their macro play is actually a lot better than some other teams in the league. You know, you could definitely look at just week 1 and say that this team is better than a team like Nongshim or DRX or the Kwangdong Freecs. If Fredit BRION continues to play like this throughout the year, I could definitely see a world in which they are a playoff team. But, you know, they always play better against the best teams, and then they lose against the teams that are kind of bad around them or middle of the road. So we'll have to see if they can continue the consistency of being at least pretty good like they were in this series overall. But yeah, great win for T1. Fredit BRION looks good. Honestly, just a really entertaining series. And props to Gumayusi and Keria for going absolutely god mode and getting T1 to 2-0 for the first time in quite a while. Moving on to day 4 here, and kicking off day 4 was Nongshim RedForce taking on Liiv SANDBOX in a really important 2-0 win here for Nongshim to kind of get their season back on track here, at least early on. A really solid 2-0 series sweep here. Nongshim never really lost control of the series. A lot of that was due to just how well Dread played in both games 1 and especially game 2 here on the Diana, absolutely taking over. A little substitution note to be made here. Peter is subbed in here for Effort. Effort had a terrible series in the first series of the year, and I'm not sure if that at all contributed to him getting benched after just one series, but Peter comes in. He did look a lot better. However, they are, of course, into a much worse bot lane here in Liiv SANDBOX, who you could argue is the worst bot lane in the LCK, or at least one of them. This was really the Dread show. Game 1, overall, everybody kind of did really well. Ghost had a really good game 1 here on the Jhin. He was a big reason why they were able to kind of facilitate early. And then the Talon just late game with the Yuumi on top of him was really absolutely devastating to go into. Peter played, I mean, quote-unquote, played really well on the Yuumi. I say the Yuumi was really important in game 1 here. It's hard for me to say anyone plays well on Yuumi because Yuumi's not necessarily known for the difficulty of that champion, but the Yuumi was super important here in game 1. Ghost was really facilitated by that in lane to get ahead, and then late game, the Talon was basically unstoppable with the Yuumi on top of him. BDD bounced back in a decent way here on the Victor, and then Kana was good as well. Overall, everybody played well on the side of Nongshim. Krako had a good early game on the Xin Zhao, and Closer, I thought, played pretty well this entire series. But outside of those two, Liv didn't really have much going for them. Game 2 was the Dread show here on Diana. He just took over the map. Peter played really well on the Braum as well, protecting the team. Overall, I'd say those two were definitely the most important players to this Nongshim win, and I would expect to see Peter stay in the lineup after what was overall a really, really good series out of him. But Ghost played really well on the Aphelios as well. Kana on the Graves in game 2 was much more impressive than in game 1. He was, of course, going into a Camille instead of a Ryze, so a little bit of an easier matchup for the Graves, I would say. But if you're looking for positives on Liiv SANDBOX's side, While Krago didn't have a very good game 2, he was kind of outclassed in game 2 for the most part. He did look good in game 1 on the Xin Zhao, and Closer I thought looked good in both games, on both the Zoe and the Akali. Closer was by far the best performing member of Liiv SANDBOX in this series. He is a little bit out. You know, I don't want to say he might be better than the team around him, but right now it's kind of looking like that a little bit. My dud of the series is going to go to Envy. It could very much go to Kale here as well, but Envy just did absolutely nothing on the Ezreal in both games. If you're going to pick the Ezreal, you have to at least do damage, and Envy was not doing damage, and that is a very concerning trend. Like I said, it very much could have gone to Kale, who also didn't really do anything on the Karma Leona. Just theoretically take this dud of the series as bot lane got the dud of the series for Liiv SANDBOX if you want to be really serious about it, but obviously the player of the series kind of has to go to Dread here. He took over the map in game 2 on the Diana, and then late game on game 1 on the Talon. He was everywhere. These are picks that you have to be better on in order to really succeed with, and he absolutely was better today. Very, very close second for player of the series was Peter at support, and then Ghost and Kana also played really well. I think BDD was fine. I think he still is a little concerning here. You really don't want him being the weak point of this team, but early on in the season, that is maybe what it's looking like, which is definitely a little bit weird. But overall, great series here from Dread to bounce back from the first of the year. And then Peter coming in for effort looked really, really good. The synergy between him and Ghost was a lot better than that was between Ghost and effort. So maybe we're going to see a lot more of Peter. Overall, really good bounce back series here from Nongshim. They absolutely needed it. Liv got a win early in the year, so they're not absolutely dreading this loss, but you know, they are probably who we thought they were, more closer to a lower tier team, and maybe this has more to say about DRX than it does about Liiv SANDBOX, but their first series of the year might have just been a little bit of an outlier. Overall, Nongshim looking a lot better here, and that's definitely a good sign if you're a Nongshim fan. Moving on to the next series, which was a very fun one to watch if you are a fan of KT Rolster, and that was the Kwangdong Freecs taking on KT Rolster in a really, really good 2-0 sweep here for KT. They never really lost control of this series. I think the big takeaway that I want to say about this series is for all the people in my comments section of my LCK Power Rankings video that were telling me that life is not as good as I had him ranked. I mean, look at this series. His set is just absolute chef's kiss. This was an unbelievable series of supporting from Life. This was as support gap as you could get. And I want to give a huge shout out to Life for that. He had a fantastic series, looking like he did back in 2020 spring, or 2020 summer, I should say, not so much 2021 summer. The other big gap, I think, in the series was for sure in the jungle. There wasn't too much to say about game 1. A little bit of a slow game where, you know, set engages just kind of took over. Rascal had a lot of agency in the top lane on the Tryndamere and did really, really well with that. Rascal also looking really, really good into Keen here. You know, just overall, KT looking like the better team. And honestly, at this point, I will say that they probably are the better team. Arya looking decent in game 1, but really he shined in game 2. And then the Jarvan, both in games 1 and game 2, absolutely took over. The Lissandra pick did absolutely nothing in the mid lane, worth noting. Game 2 was really where things got interesting. Life, again, taking over on that set with all the engages. Him and Jarvan were just everywhere on the map. They had absolutely no answer to a set engage into a Jarvan knockup into a Cataclysm. They had no answer to that. Arya also really, really good job this series on the roams, on the Sylas. Sylas is one of his comfort picks, and he really showed that off here in the LCK. Looking really good against Fate. Fate definitely not showing up early in the season. Was a contender for dud of the set here. Dud of the series, but could it have gone to anyone other than Elam, who looked absolutely lost here on the Lee Sin, completely out-jungled by Cuz. Elam got absolutely obliterated in the series. There's really no other way around it. I'm not going to say Elam is the reason that they lost this series, because Hoyt and Teddy were not that good either, and neither was Fate, but Elam looked completely outclassed. He's a strong contender for dud of the week here. I don't think he's going to win it just because another player, I think, earned it a little bit more, but just know that Elam had a very, very bad week 1, and it really was capped off by this poor series against Cuz. But on the bright side, KT, pretty much top to support, looks phenomenal. The only The only part that I'm at least a little bit concerned about is I want a little bit more proactivity from aiming in the bottom lane when he's winning. I know he's on the Aphelios and that the set is roaming a lot, but aiming got some leads here and just kind of played it a little safer, which again is fine, but you want to see a little bit more of the game-winning mentality from aiming, I think, here. If you're going to have a more supportive style mid laner here in Arya, obviously Cuz is more supporting, and then Life is a support, so you want to see more of those like takeover plays, I think, from aiming, but that's really just a nitpick. I mean, KT played basically perfectly in this series, and nothing but good things to say about them. As for Kwangdong, this is a disastrous start to the season, basically on the level of DRX, maybe even worse. Not a good start to the year for them. LM, you know, looks terrible, which is not a good sign in the jungle, and then basically mid to bot looks even worse. I'm probably more concerned about Kwangdong than I am about DRX turning it around, because at least with DRX, I think that some of the players who, you know, aren't as important have at least been playing well. I don't think you can say that for Kwangdong. I think basically jungle to support has been bad this year, and Keen hasn't necessarily been good. So not a good look for Kwangdong here, but if you're a KT Rolster fan, you are incredibly excited about, not only did they, you know, play really, really well against DAMWON earlier in the week, you know, they did get 2-0'd, but they still played really well. They then come back with a really strong 2-0 of a team that a lot of people thought were going to be in the playoffs. So a good start to the year for KT. They're probably a lot better than I thought they were. Now we're jumping into the final day of LCK action from Week 1, Day 5, and that was kicked off by a matchup between two teams that I had towards the bottom of the power rankings, and that was Hanwha Life taking on Fredit BRION here in what was a pretty fun series. A 2-1 series win here for Fredit BRION. They looked pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. Let's talk about Game 1 first. Game 1 was decently even up until Lava just absolutely took over on the Corki. Had a really good game on the Xin Zhao as well. Those two looked really, really good. Basically, Lava just absolutely... I mean, we see this all the time. If you're watching the LPL as well right now, you'll have seen this 8 times already. The game gets to about 25-30 minutes, and Corki just does 18 trillion damage. If you let him get there, he is going to absolutely melt you. And in Game 1, he did get there, and he absolutely melted Hanwha Life. So, big win there for Lava and and Fredit BRION in general. Game 2 was super in control for Hanwha, and then they did their absolute best to try and throw the game. They were up, like, what, 6k gold at, like, 21 minutes, and by, like, 33 minutes, they had lost their gold lead. I mean, just a disastrous performance here from Hanwha in Game 2. They do manage to pull it back around and come back for the win, but man, it should not have been that close. The reason that they were in that game was Karis on the Akali, which was a really, really good performance. Karis at the beginning of the year, I know I hyped him up a lot going into my LCK power rankings. Karis was the reason that I was maybe thinking this team could be better than I had projected. He's looked really good to start the year. He's kind of come true on that expectation. I know it's not against the best team in the world, but Fredit BRION might actually be better than what we had anticipated. But Karis looking really good on the Akali and being kind of the player of the game, quote-unquote, in Game 2. And then Game 3 was just a bloodbath. A fun game, but Fredit BRION, unlike Games 1 and 2, which were a lot closer, Fredit BRION had complete control over Game 3 pretty much the entire time. A lot of that was thanks to and how well he controlled the map. He's having a fantastic start to the year, and I know we say this about every single year. He goes through these stretches of like 2 or 3 series where he's looking really good, like a top half jungler in LCK, and then he'll just plummet back down to earth and be really bad for another 3 or 4 series. So I'm kind of hesitant to say that is maybe having quote-unquote a breakout year, but he sure had a good breakout week 1. That is for sure. He's looking really good here. Henna also looking really good on the gym in Game 3 as well. Overall, just a good win here for Fredit BRION. Lava is going to be my player of the series. That Corki game in Game 1 was really strong. He had a really good Game 2 on Victor as well. And even in Game 3 on LeBlanc, although he wasn't the focus point, he was still pretty good. My dud of the series is going to go to SamD in the bottom lane. He giveth and he taketh away here. He was my player of the series in their win earlier. He's my dud of the series in their loss here. Just not consistent enough. He looked really bad on the Caitlyn, especially in Game 3. Definitely not something that you want to see out of your AD carry, is taking what is essentially the power pick in the meta and looking not good on it. So, you know, not the best situation there, but Karis, you know, if you're looking for upsides for Hanwha Life, Karis looked pretty good in Game 2, especially, and then On Fleek looked pretty good in Game 2 as well. So, you know, at least your jungle mid is kind of coming around. Bot lane might be a little more inconsistent than we thought, and then top lane's just kind of meh. Both top laners here, Dudu and Morgan, are both just kind of meh. Ironically, former Hanwha Life teammates here. Dudu was kind of stuck behind Morgan last year, and that was the reason he wasn't playing. Neither could really outplay the other, both just kind of had meh series, but honestly, Fredit BRION might be better than we're anticipating. Obviously, you know, I don't want to overreact or anything. They looked fine against T1, which is a good sign. They took a game off of T1, which you just don't often see. And then they go and they pretty, you know, decently convincingly beat Hanwha here. Hanwha should have beaten them earlier in Game 2, which would have soured me a little bit on them, but they still look okay. This is a team that could potentially actually push for playoffs. There are obviously a lot of teams struggling in the LCK right now, like DRX and KDF. So for Fredit BRION, maybe they can take advantage of that and kind of push into a playoff spot. I'm not sure I'm going to predict that yet. I don't want to overreact to them beating what I had as the worst team in the league. So overall, a good series here from Fredit BRION. Everybody looking at least decent, especially Umti and Lava. And then for Hanwha, at least your, you know, young mid laner is looking good, but everybody else does need to step up a little bit if they don't want to be towards the bottom of the LCK this year. That's going to bring us to our final series of Week 1, and we saved the best for last. Not only was it the most hype, but it was the most fun. Everything about the series was phenomenal. Let's talk about it. It was DAMWON KIA taking on Gen.G in a really fun 2-1 series win here for Gen.G. Let's talk about it game by game. Game 1 was firmly in the grasp of Gen.G until late game strikes again. The Canyon Diana strikes again. A fantastic series from Canyon overall, but this game 1 especially was super duper good. Really setting up Dectum to eliminate Gen.G with that Samira. A really, really fun first game here that I just can't believe that Gen.G lost. Then we move on to game 2, and it's looking like it's going to be the same story. Gen.G gets a huge lead early and almost throws it away. They end up losing the lead at like 35 minutes, but unfortunately, they're actually able to take back the lead and win the game incredibly closely. A lot of that is just thanks to how Chad Doran played here on the Gragas. Not playing Gragas like Gragas, more so playing Gragas like, I don't know, the biggest Malphite even, I don't know. Peanut pulling out the Poppy in this game. A super duper fun game 2. Chovy got caught a little bit more than you would like to see here in game 2 on the Corki, but I promise he makes up for it. In the team fights, he is phenomenally. I think he puts out, this is like a 48-minute game, I think he put up almost 70,000 damage in this game. Something ridiculous from Chovy's Corki. And then moving into game 3, it was a little bit more of a clean-cut Gen.G win, quote-unquote. DK actually had the majority of the gold for most of the game here, but you can only int on Singed support so many times. Yes, the pick that ruined solo queue for a few days. Singed support was pulled out here in game 3, and yeah, it was pretty garbage for most of the game. But that last team fight around Dragon, the big flip, it cost DAMWON the series. And man, what a hype way for things to finish off. I almost wanted to give it to Lehens, player of the series that is, just because of the Singed support in game 3. But I couldn't do that. He inted too much in that game. I know that's what Singed does, but you know, not the most clean pick or game here from Gen.G, but my player of the series is going to go to Chovy. Yes, he did get caught out a little bit too much here on the Corki, but man, that damage output in those team fights was absolutely critical. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Corki getting to late game. He will win you games by himself if he's given the chance, especially if you get to 48 minutes into the game like game 2. My dud of the series is going to be Hoya in the top lane, mostly for that game 2 on Akali. It was not that great. there weren't really a lot of options for quote-unquote dud of the series here. Both teams played really, really well. I think Hanwha was just kind of the weakest player on the Rift throughout the entire series, and that for me is going to equate to dud of the series. But, you know, overall, just a fun series. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend watching it. This is the first series that I can remember where if you look at Games 1, Games 2, and Games 3, the team with less kills actually won all 3 games, which is absurd to me, but, you know, every team tried to throw. And it was just a phenomenal game. Really, really, really fun to watch. Highly recommend it. Everybody played well. Canyon played well. Dectum played really, really well. I thought Kellen played really well, especially in Game 1 on the Nautilus. Doran was awesome in Game 2. Peanut on the Poppy. Chovy's Corky absolutely taking over. Support Singed, for crying out loud. There is not more to League of Legends than this. This is by far the most fun series of the year so far in professional League of Legends. Please, please, please go and watch it if you are all interested. I don't know how anybody is going to top how fun this one was. That is going to do it for week 1. We've gone over every single series. I've talked about my thoughts, my opinions on the players, on the games, on everything. Up on the screen right now, you can see on the left-hand side the current standings in the LCK. If there are ties in terms of both matches and series scores, it's just going to be sorted alphabetically. So as you can see at the top, Gen.G over T1. Gen.G's just first alphabetically over T1, so that's really the only difference there. On the right-hand side, you're going to see my power rankings and how they've changed week to week. So we'll talk about the biggest risers and the biggest fallers. The biggest riser this week is going to be KT Rolster, kind of going toe-to-toe with DAMWON, and then looking really, really solid in their series against Kwangdong, absolutely obliterating them. So they're going to actually move up to 4th from 7th for me. I do believe that they are probably at the top right now, at least for me, of that kind of group of teams that is looking maybe to break into the top 3, but aren't the top 3. My biggest follower this week should be no surprise. It's going to be DRX, although Kwangdong does fall down to 8th as well. DRX just falls from 4 to 7, so they fall out of the playoffs. Kwangdong also falls out of the playoffs. Liiv SANDBOX and KT moving into it. Both DRX and Kwangdong having absolutely disastrous starts to the year. Some people might be wanting to see them below, like Fredit BRION or Hanwha Life, but for me, I think they still need to prove that they're worse than them to really have me put them below. BRION might be a team that does move up, but I want to see a little bit more consistency. We've seen kind of breakaway wins from this team in the past, and then they absolutely fall apart with no consistency. So I want to see that consistency from this roster before I end up putting them higher than this. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. It really does let me know that you guys enjoy the content. I should let you know my player of the week here is going to be Gumayushi on T1. He was the best player in the LCK this week. He was phenomenal in both of their series. My dud of the week, although it is a close competition, is going to go to Kingen on DRX. He was probably the worst player in the LCK this week. So Gumayushi is my player of the week. Kingen is my dud of the week. But if you guys enjoyed, yeah, leave a like. Let me know who your players of the week or your duds of the week were in the comment section below. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.